Imagine a billionaire, Damien Ashworth, his heart as fortified as his financial empire. Then, picture a rain-lashed Boston street and a single, desperate mother, Clara, shielding her baby, Sophie, from the storm. In a moment that defies his every calculated instinct, Damien hands her the keys to his empty mansion, an act of shocking compassion that sets in motion a turbulent journey of hope, suspicion, and profound regret. But when the world's cynicism, personified by a jealous rival, threatens to extinguish this fragile lifeline, will Damien succumb to doubt, or will he fight for a connection he never knew he needed? This is the story of how a moment of unexpected kindness shatters a life of cold pragmatism, leading to a desperate search for truth, a chance at redemption, and the extraordinary possibility of forging an unbreakable family from the most unlikely of beginnings. Now delve into the intricate details of Damien and Clara's transformative story. The heavens over Boston unleashed a torrent, a relentless gray curtain that blurred the city's historic skyline and turned the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill into treacherous, glistening pathways. Rain hammered the roof of Damien Ashworth's Bentley, a percussive rhythm lost on its sole occupant. Damien, CEO of Ashworth Global Holdings, a man whose life was a monument to ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment, was mentally dissecting a hostile takeover bid due to be finalized in Zurich. Emotions, in Damien's meticulously ordered universe, were liabilities, volatile, unpredictable, and best kept under a level of control bordering on suppression. His world was a fortress, its drawbridge perpetually raised. He rarely noticed the city beyond its function as the stage for his commercial conquests, but today something broke through. As his chauffeur, Stevens, navigated the slick descent of Mount Vernon Street, the car paused for a crossing pedestrian. Damien's gaze, usually fixed on the glowing screen of his tablet, drifted to a recessed doorway of a shuttered antique shop. There, a young woman, barely more than a girl, was a study in desperate resilience. She was hunched over a small, bundled child, her own body an insufficient shield against the biting wind and the icy needles of rain. Her coat, thin and dark, was plastered to her frame, and even through the rain-streaked window, Damien could see the tremor in her arms as she clutched the infant. A flicker, unwelcome and sharp, pierced Damien's composure. It wasn't pity, not exactly. It was something colder, more unsettling. A ghost of a memory, a faint echo from a past he had walled off with granite and steel. He'd once known a cold that seeped into the bones, a hunger that twisted the gut. He'd buried that boy deep, but sometimes, unexpectedly, the earth shifted. He saw the raw, primal instinct in her posture, the mother lioness, starved and exposed, yet utterly focused on protecting her cub. A pathetic, rain-smeared piece of cardboard lay beside her, the inked words bleeding into illegibility, but the core message was universal: help. "Stevens, pull over for a moment," Damien said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. Stevens, a man whose unflappability was legendary, expertly maneuvered the large car to the curb, his eyes briefly questioning Damien's in the rearview mirror, but his face impassive. Damien watched the woman. She wasn't looking at the car, her attention solely on the child. He could see the exhaustion etched into the pale oval of her face, the dark smudges beneath her eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights. The child stirred, a small, whimpering cough carrying faintly to Damien's ears. That sound, so fragile, so vulnerable, seemed to bypass his rational mind and strike a chord deep within. "This is madness," a cold, logical voice in his head insisted. "You have a flight to Zurich. A billion-dollar deal hangs in the balance. This is not your concern." But another, quieter voice, one he hadn't heard in years, whispered something else. He remembered his own mother, her face worn with worry, her hands chapped from endless work, shielding him from a world that had often felt merciless. He saw a fleeting, painful resemblance in the fierce tenderness of this stranger. He lowered the window. The wind and rain immediately invaded the climate-controlled sanctuary of the car. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through the downpour. The young woman, Clara, startled violently, her head snapping up. Fear, stark and immediate, flashed in her eyes. She instinctively tightened her hold on the child, Sophie. I don't have any money to give you," she said, her voice thin but surprisingly steady, a defensive pride in her tone. Damien found himself momentarily wrong-footed. He hadn't intended to offer spare change. The idea forming in his mind was far more radical, far more uncharacteristic. "That's not why I stopped," he said, trying to soften his usually brusque tone. He saw the suspicion warring with desperation in her gaze. "It's not safe for the child out here, or for you." He made a split-second decision, one that would have sent his board into apoplexy and his PR team into meltdown. He reached into his breast pocket, not for his wallet, but for his house keys. He detached a single, heavy, brass key. "My house is nearby, on Beacon Street. It's empty. I'm leaving the country for several days. You can stay there, get warm, get dry." He held out the key. Clara stared at the key as if it were a mythical artifact. Her mind, numbed by cold and hunger, struggled to process his words. A man in a car that cost more than she'd earned in her entire life was offering her his house? It had to be a trick, a cruel joke. I don't understand," she stammered, her eyes darting from his face to the key, then back again, searching for the catch. "There's nothing to understand," Damien said, a surprising note of impatience in his voice, mostly with himself and the absurdity of the situation. "It's an offer. Take it or leave it, but that child needs to be out of this storm." Sophie chose that moment to let out a series of pitiful, racking coughs. That sound seemed to solidify Clara's decision. The primal need to protect her daughter overrode her fear, her suspicion. With a trembling hand, she reached out and took the key. Its cold metal was a stark contrast to the sudden, disbelieving warmth that spread through her. Damien scribbled his address on the back of a business card. "The alarm is off. There's food in the kitchen. Help yourselves." He hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Stevens will take you there." He spoke briefly to his chauffeur, then, without another word to Clara, he raised the window, severing the connection. "To the airport, Stevens!" And find a way to make up the lost time. As the Bentley pulled away, Damien stared resolutely ahead, refusing to look back, refusing to analyze the monumental breach in his own defenses. He had a fortress to command, a world to conquer. Yet the image of Clara's pale, stunned face and Sophie's fragile form remained imprinted on his mind, an unwelcome, unsettling guest in the usually sterile chambers of his thoughts. Clara, clutching the key and the address, felt as though she'd stepped into an alternate reality. Stevens, with an air of quiet professionalism that was almost as bewildering as his employer's offer, helped her and a still-coughing Sophie into the warm, dry interior of the limousine. The scent of rich leather and subtle cologne enveloped them. Sophie, lulled by the warmth and the gentle motion, soon drifted into an exhausted sleep in Clara's arms. The house on Beacon Street was an imposing four-story brick edifice, its windows dark, its facade speaking of generations of Ashworth wealth and power. Stevens used his own key to open the massive front door, then disarmed a complex security system. He gestured Clara inside. "Mr. Ashworth instructed me to ensure you were settled. The kitchen is through there. Guest suites are on the second and third floors. Please, make yourselves at home." His tone was neutral, betraying no curiosity or judgment. He then quietly withdrew, leaving Clara and Sophie alone in the echoing silence of the vast mansion. Clara stood in the marble-floored foyer, Sophie still asleep in her arms, feeling utterly dwarfed. The sheer scale of the place was intimidating. A sweeping staircase, oil paintings of stern-faced Ashworth ancestors, antique furniture gleaming in the dim light filtering through the tall windows. It was a world away from the damp doorways and crowded shelters that had been her reality for so long. Tentatively, she began to explore. Each room was a testament to opulence and taste, yet possessed an underlying chill, a sense of being unlived in, more museum than home. She found the kitchen, a vast, state-of-the-art space, its sub-zero refrigerator stocked with an overwhelming array of food. The sight of fresh fruit, milk, cheese, and bread brought tears to her eyes. First, Sophie. She found a luxurious guest suite on the second floor overlooking a rain-swept garden. The bed was enormous, piled high with silken pillows and a thick down comforter. Gently, she undressed Sophie, her fingers lingering on the child's cool skin, her heart aching at the thought of the hardships her daughter had already endured in her short life. She found a small, soft guest robe that she could wrap Sophie in, then tucked her into the vastness of the bed. Sophie sighed in her sleep, snuggling into the warmth. Only then did Clara allow herself to think of her own needs. She found a bathroom that was larger than any room she'd ever rented, with a deep soaking tub. The hot water was a benediction, easing the chill from her bones, the grime from her skin. As she soaked, the tension that had been her constant companion for months began to slowly, painstakingly, unravel. Wrapped in another thick robe, she returned to the kitchen. The simple act of preparing a meal, an omelet, toast, a glass of milk, felt like a sacred ritual. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, the warmth spreading through her, a quiet miracle. Later, curled beside Sophie on the enormous bed, the storm still raging outside, Clara finally allowed herself to succumb to an exhaustion so profound it was almost a physical pain. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she slept soundly, deeply, in a warm, safe place, the improbable kindness of a stranger, her only shield against the world. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. Clara moved through the silent, opulent house like a ghost, careful not to disturb anything, acutely aware of her status as an interloper. She cooked nourishing meals for herself and Sophie, washed their few clothes in the high-tech laundry room, and spent hours simply watching Sophie sleep, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so immense it was almost painful. She learned the rhythms of the house, the quiet hum of the heating system, the distant chime of a grandfather clock, the way the light shifted through the tall windows. She discovered a library filled with leather-bound books, a sunroom overflowing with dormant plants, a music room with a gleaming grand piano. It was a life of unimaginable privilege, and she was a temporary, bewildered guest. She found herself wondering about Damien Ashworth, the man who had so casually offered her this sanctuary. His face, stern and unreadable, was imprinted in her memory. What kind of man was he? Cold and detached, as his demeanor suggested. Or was there a hidden well of compassion beneath that forbidding exterior? His act of kindness was so at odds with the aura of power and control he exuded. As Sophie's cough subsided and a little color returned to her cheeks, Clara began to think beyond their immediate survival. The respite Damien Ashworth had given them was a precious gift, but it was temporary. She knew she couldn't stay here forever. She had to find a way to rebuild their lives, to create a real home for Sophie, a future free from the fear and uncertainty that had haunted them. She thought of her past, a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. Nursing school, her passion for caring for others, her dreams of a stable, loving family, all shattered by grief, then by the cruel betrayal of Ethan Cole. Ethan, with his easy charm and false promises, had preyed on her vulnerability after her parents' sudden death. He had systematically drained her small inheritance, her emotional reserves, and then, when she'd discovered she was pregnant, he had vanished, leaving her with nothing but debts and a broken heart. The descent into homelessness had been swift and brutal. The shame, the fear, the constant struggle to find food and shelter for Sophie, it had been a relentless, soul-crushing ordeal. This house, this temporary haven, had given her a chance to breathe, to think, to regain a semblance of strength. She would not waste it. Damien returned from Zurich 5 days later, the deal successfully concluded, his reputation as a formidable negotiator further enhanced. He let himself into the silent house, an unfamiliar sense of anticipation prickling at him. He'd told himself his offer to Clara had been a momentary aberration, a calculated risk to assuage a fleeting, inconvenient emotion. He'd expected to find the house empty, perhaps a note of thanks left on the hall table. Instead, as he ascended the grand staircase, he heard it, a soft, melodic humming, followed by a child's delighted giggle. He paused, his hand on the polished banister. He found himself moving towards the sound, drawn by an impulse he didn't bother to analyze. The door to the guest suite he'd vaguely indicated to Clara was slightly ajar. He looked in. The scene that met his eyes was utterly incongruous with his life, with this house. Clara was sitting on the floor, her back to him, a colorful picture book open in her lap. Sophie, propped up against a pillow, was pointing at the pictures, her small face alight with joy, as Clara made animal noises. The room, usually sterile and impersonal, felt warm, lived in. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, creating an almost ethereal glow around the mother and child. Damien stood there, unseen, for a long moment. A strange, unfamiliar ache spread through his chest. It wasn't unpleasant. It was a thawing. He saw Clara's gentle patience, Sophie's innocent delight. He saw a normalcy, a simple human connection that had been absent from his own life for as long as he could remember. His own childhood had been marked by his parents' relentless drive for success, their emotional distance. Love, in his experience, was a transaction, affection, a means to an end. This was different. Without conscious thought, a faint smile touched Damien's lips. It felt alien, yet strangely fitting. Clara, perhaps sensing his presence, turned. Her eyes widened, first in surprise, then in a kind of guarded apprehension. She quickly, gracefully, rose to her feet, instinctively pulling Sophie closer. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, her voice a little breathless. I didn't expect you back so soon." "My business concluded earlier than anticipated," Damien replied, his voice smoother, less abrupt than usual. He stepped into the room, his gaze drawn to Sophie, who was regarding him with wide, curious blue eyes so like her mother's. "I trust you found everything satisfactory?" he asked, the formality of his words at odds with the unexpected softening within him. "More than satisfactory, Mr. Ashworth," Clara said, a genuine warmth in her voice. I can never thank you enough. You gave us a lifeline." He saw the profound gratitude in her eyes, the quiet dignity that even her dire circumstances hadn't extinguished. He noted the faint flush of color in her cheeks, the way her dark hair, now clean and brushed, framed her delicate features. She was younger than he'd initially thought, and possessed a quiet beauty that was more arresting than the polished, artificial glamour he was accustomed to in the women of his circle. He extended a finger towards Sophie. After a moment's solemn contemplation, the child reached out a tiny hand and grasped it, her grip surprisingly firm. A jolt, an unexpected current of pure, uncomplicated tenderness, shot through Damien. It was a sensation so foreign, so potent, it almost unnerved him. "She seems better," he observed, his voice huskier than he intended. "Yes," Clara said, her smile radiant. "The warmth, the rest, the good food, it's made all the difference. Her cough is almost gone." She paused, then, taking a deep breath, said, "Mr. Ashworth, we're ready to leave whenever you wish. We won't impose on your generosity any longer." Damien looked from Clara to Sophie, then around the sunlit room. The thought of them leaving, of this newfound warmth vanishing, of the house returning to its usual sterile silence, brought an unexpected pang of something akin to loss. "There's no immediate rush," he heard himself say, the words surprising even him. "Stay, at least until you've found alternative arrangements." He was already rationalizing. It was the least he could do. It was a practical matter. But the logical part of his brain was having a hard time convincing the part of him that was inexplicably reluctant to see them go. The fragile, unspoken truce that settled over the house was shattered 2 days later by the unannounced and unwelcome arrival of Genevieve Sterling. Genevieve was Damien's long-standing, if somewhat loosely defined, female companion. Theirs was an alliance of convenience, a partnership built on shared social standing, mutual ambition, and a cool, detached understanding of each other's needs. Genevieve was beautiful, intelligent, and as ruthlessly pragmatic as Damien himself. She considered herself the de facto mistress of his public life and, by extension, his private domain. She swept into the house like a frost wind, her stiletto heels clicking an imperious rhythm on the marble floor, her expensive Parisian perfume instantly colonizing the air. She found Damien in his study, reviewing financial reports. "Damien, darling," she purred, draping herself elegantly over the arm of his leather chair, her hand possessively on his shoulder. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd surprise you. We're overdue for a proper catch-up." Before Damien could formulate a response, a sound drifted down from the upper floor, the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched, her hand stilled on his shoulder. "What, in heaven's name, was that?" she asked, her voice losing its silken edge, replaced by a sharp, inquisitive note. Damien felt a muscle tighten in his jaw. He had, foolishly perhaps, not mentioned Clara and Sophie to Genevieve. Their presence was a complication he hadn't yet decided how to manage. "It's a temporary arrangement," he began, but Genevieve was already rising, her eyes narrowed, her innate radar for anything that might threaten her position fully activated. "Temporary arrangement," she repeated, her voice laced with suspicion. She moved towards the door, her movements fluid and purposeful. "Show me." Reluctantly, Damien followed her up the grand staircase. He knew this was going to be problematic. They found Clara in the sunroom attempting to coax a wilted fern back to life, with Sophie playing contentedly at her feet with a set of wooden blocks Damien hadn't even known he owned, relics from his own distant, unremembered childhood. Genevieve stopped dead in the doorway, her expression transitioning from curiosity to a kind of horrified disbelief, then settling into a mask of icy disdain. Her gaze raked over Clara, cataloging her simple, clean but unstylish clothes, her lack of makeup, her air of quiet domesticity. It was a look designed to wither, to diminish. "And this arrangement is," Genevieve drawled, her voice dripping sarcasm. Clara, startled by their sudden appearance, rose, instinctively drawing Sophie behind her. She met Genevieve's hostile gaze with a quiet composure that seemed to infuriate the other woman even more. "I am Clara," she said, her voice soft but clear, "and this is my daughter, Sophie." "How quaint," Genevieve said, her lips curling into a condescending smile. She turned to Damien, her eyes glittering with a possessive fury. "A word, Damien, now!" In the oppressive silence of his study, Genevieve unleashed her venom. "Have you completely lost your mind, Damien? A common vagrant and her brat living in your house? Do you have any idea what this looks like? The scandal, if this gets out. Is this some sort of philanthropic perversion?" "She needed help, Genevieve," Damien said, his voice tight. He found himself surprisingly defensive. "It was a temporary measure. She'll be leaving soon." "Soon?" Genevieve scoffed, pacing the room like a caged panther. "She should have been gone the moment you returned. People like that, Damien, they're parasites. They see an opportunity, a weakness, and they exploit it. She's playing you, can't you see? The damsel in distress, the innocent child. It's a classic ploy. What is she after? Your money? Your name?" Her words were sharp, calculated, designed to prey on Damien's innate cynicism, his fear of being manipulated, of emotional entanglements. He was a man who prided himself on his astute judgment, his ability to see through artifice. Genevieve knew his vulnerabilities, and she was expertly exploiting them. "She's not like that," Damien found himself saying, but even to his own ears, his defense sounded weak, unconvincing. A seed of doubt, insidious and unwelcome, began to take root. Had he been naive? Had his uncharacteristic act of compassion blinded him to a more cynical reality? "Oh, Damien, you're a brilliant businessman, a titan of industry," Genevieve said, her voice softening, becoming wheedling, conspiratorial. She placed her hand on his arm. "But when it comes to matters of the heart, or rather, matters of this kind, you can be surprisingly gullible. I'm merely trying to protect you, from her, from yourself." She painted a picture of scheming opportunism, of potential scandal, of the damage to his carefully cultivated reputation. She reminded him of a past business associate who had feigned loyalty only to betray him, a wound that, though healed, had left a scar of mistrust. Her arguments were insidious, appealing to his pragmatism, his fear of appearing weak or foolish. The warmth he had begun to feel towards Clara and Sophie, the fragile sense of connection, now seemed like a dangerous vulnerability. Genevieve was right. He had been reckless. He had allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment. Later that day, the doubt Genevieve had so skillfully planted had festered into a cold suspicion. Damien sought out Clara, his expression shuttered, his tone formal, almost accusatory. He found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared Sophie's evening meal. The domesticity of the scene, which only hours before had seemed comforting, now struck him as a carefully constructed illusion. "Clara," he began, his voice devoid of the warmth she had begun to cautiously trust. "We need to talk." Clara turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She saw the change in him immediately. The shuttered eyes, the hard set of his jaw, a chill snaked down her spine. "Mr. Ashworth, I've been reevaluating this situation," he said, his words precise, impersonal. "Your presence here, it's become complicated. I need to understand your intentions more clearly. Is there anything you haven't told me? Anything at all?" His question, though couched in polite terms, felt like an indictment. The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. Clara felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of humiliation and a growing righteous anger. She had offered him nothing but gratitude, had taken nothing that wasn't freely given. To have her integrity questioned, after everything. She took a deep breath, her innate dignity her only shield. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, her voice quiet, but infused with a steely resolve, "my intentions have been clear from the moment you offered me your key. I sought shelter for my child. You provided it. For that I will be eternally grateful." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "I have nothing to hide. My past is difficult. It has taught me the value of honesty and the pain of deceit. I would not inflict that on anyone, least of all someone who has shown me such unexpected kindness." She did not offer details of Ethan's betrayal, of her struggles. To do so now in the face of his suspicion would feel like begging, like trying to justify her worthiness. Her pride, honed by hardship, would not allow it. Damien watched her, his face unreadable. He saw the hurt in her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin, a part of him, the part that had been so moved by her vulnerability, by Sophie's innocent trust, recoiled from his own harshness. But Genevieve's warnings, her cynical assessment, echoed in his mind, drowning out the quieter, more compassionate voice. He was a man of logic, of evidence. And the evidence, as Genevieve had presented it, pointed to a high probability of deception. "Perhaps," he said, his voice cold, "it would be best if you made arrangements to leave as soon as possible. Tomorrow, perhaps." Clara's heart sank. The sanctuary, the fragile hope she had allowed herself to nurture, crumbled. She saw the finality in his eyes, the victory of his suspicion over his compassion. She would not plead. She would not demean herself by trying to convince him of what he was clearly unwilling to see. "I understand, Mr. Ashworth," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. She turned away, unable to bear the sight of his cold, judgmental face any longer. "We will be gone by morning." Without another word, she went upstairs to pack their few belongings, a profound aching desolation settling over her. Sophie, sensing her mother's distress, began to whimper. Clara picked her up, holding her tight, her own tears held firmly in check. She would not break, not here, not now. The next morning Damien awoke to a house that felt colder, emptier than it had in days. He descended the stairs, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He found a single heavy brass key resting on the polished mahogany of the hall table. Beside it, a small, worn wooden block, one of Sophie's toys. There was no note. Clara and Sophie were gone. A wave of something akin to desolation washed over Damien. He picked up the wooden block, its surface smooth from a child's touch. He had what he wanted, hadn't he? His house was secure, his life uncomplicated by messy emotional entanglements. Genevieve would be pleased. Yet as he moved through the silent, opulent rooms, the silence pressed in on him, suffocating. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate only dust and emptiness. The faint, lingering scent of baby powder, the echo of Sophie's laughter, the memory of Clara's quiet, gentle presence, they haunted him. He had acted decisively, pragmatically, he told himself. He had protected himself, his assets, his reputation. But the image of Clara's wounded eyes, her quiet, dignified retreat, burned in his memory. Had he been right? Or had he allowed Genevieve's cynicism, his own ingrained mistrust, to extinguish a fragile flame of something genuine? The wooden block felt heavy in his hand. Days turned into a week. Damien threw himself back into his work with a vengeance, but the usual satisfaction he derived from his conquests eluded him. The house remained a cold, echoing mausoleum. Genevieve's triumphant calls went largely unanswered. Her shallow pronouncements, her possessive insinuations, now grated on him. He saw her for the first time not as an asset, but as a liability, a source of a peculiar, insidious poison. The investigator he'd initially hired to vet potential board members for a new acquisition was a discreet, thorough man named Harris. On an impulse Damien couldn't quite explain, he called him. "Harris," he said, his voice clipped, "I have a personal matter. I need you to find someone, a woman named Clara with a young child, Sophie, last seen in Boston, and I need everything you can find on her." Discreetly. He didn't know why he was doing it. To confirm his suspicions? To assuage a nagging, inexplicable guilt? He didn't analyze it. He simply acted. The report landed on his desk 3 days later. Damien read it in his study, the room where Genevieve had spun her web of doubt, the room where he had delivered his cold, dismissive verdict to Clara. As he read, a slow, sickening wave of shame washed over him. The report laid bare Clara's life with stark, unsparing detail. The tragic loss of her parents, her interrupted nursing studies, her vulnerability. Then Ethan Cole, a predator who had systematically exploited her grief, her trust, stealing her inheritance, her hope, leaving her pregnant and destitute. The report detailed her desperate struggle to survive, to protect Sophie, her resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. There was no hint of deceit, no pattern of opportunism. Only a litany of misfortune met with unwavering courage and a fierce, protective love for her child. Her references from her volunteer work at a clinic before her life unraveled spoke of a compassionate, dedicated young woman. Damien dropped the report as if it had burned his fingers. He felt physically ill. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, suspicious fool. He had taken a woman who had already endured unimaginable betrayal, and in his ignorance, in his damnable pride, he had betrayed her again. He had looked into her honest, wounded eyes and seen only the reflection of his own jaded cynicism. Genevieve's carefully crafted insinuations, her appeals to his pragmatism, now seemed like the manipulative, self-serving lies they were. He saw with sudden, blinding clarity the chasm between Genevieve's cold, calculating ambition and Clara's quiet, uncomplaining strength. The wooden block which he had inexplicably kept on his desk seemed to reproach him. He picked up the phone. His call to Genevieve was brief, brutal, and final. He informed her, in no uncertain terms, that their association, personal and professional, was over. He listened to her shocked, then furious, then pleading response with a cold detachment, then ended the call. One part of the poison excised, but the deeper wound, the self-inflicted one, remained. Harris's report had included Clara's current whereabouts, a crowded, grim shelter in a run-down part of Roxbury. Damien drove there himself, his Bentley a conspicuous symbol of the chasm between their worlds. He found the shelter, a place that smelled of despair and disinfectant. His heart hammered against his ribs, a mixture of shame, trepidation, and a desperate, burgeoning hope. He found Clara in a noisy common room, patiently trying to coax a listless Sophie to eat a spoonful of watery porridge. Clara looked thinner, paler, the shadows under her eyes darker than before, but her expression, as she looked at her daughter, was one of unwavering love and determination. When she saw Damien standing in the doorway, her eyes widened, a flicker of, was it fear, resentment, or just weary surprise, crossing her face. She rose, instinctively pulling Sophie closer. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Damien took a step into the room, acutely aware of the curious, assessing stares of the other women. He felt utterly exposed, stripped of his usual armor of wealth and power. "Clara," he began, his voice hoarse, the carefully rehearsed words vanishing from his mind. "Please, can we talk? Somewhere private?" She hesitated for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, she nodded. She spoke briefly to another woman, who agreed to watch Sophie, then led Damien to a small, bleak interview room. He stood before her, feeling more vulnerable than he had in his entire adult life. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to suppress. I don't know where to begin, except to say, I was wrong, so profoundly, despicably wrong." He told her about the investigator, about the report. He didn't spare himself, laying bare his own arrogance, his suspicion, the way he had allowed Genevieve's poison to infect his judgment. "I looked into your eyes, Clara, and instead of seeing your strength, your honesty, I saw what I expected to see, what I had been conditioned to see, and in doing so, I failed you. I failed Sophie. I failed myself." He took a ragged breath. "Since you left my house, it's not a home. It's a museum. Cold. Empty. You and Sophie. You brought life into it. You brought light. I didn't realize it until it was gone." Clara listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm not here to make excuses," Damien continued, his voice raw with sincerity. "There are no excuses for my behavior. I am here to beg for your forgiveness, though I know I don't deserve it." He paused, then plunged ahead, the words tumbling out, heartfelt and unrehearsed. "And I'm here to ask you, to implore you, to come back. Not as a temporary guest, Clara, not as a charity case, but as my honored guests. As whatever you want to be. I want to give you and Sophie a home, a real home, safe, secure, filled with whatever you need. I want to help you rebuild your life, your nursing career, anything. I want to try to make amends, to earn back a fraction of your trust, if that's even possible." He looked at her, his soul bared, his carefully constructed world shattered, waiting for her verdict. Clara finally raised her eyes to meet his. He saw the pain there, the lingering hurt, but he also saw something else. A flicker of understanding, a glimmer of hope. "Mr. Ashworth, Damien," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "what you did, it hurt, deeply. Trust. It's not something I give easily anymore. Ethan, he taught me that lesson well." "I know," Damien whispered, his heart aching at the pain he had caused, the pain that echoed her past betrayals. "But Sophie," Clara continued, her gaze softening as she thought of her daughter. "She deserves so much more than this. She deserves a chance, a safe place to grow, to laugh." She looked at Damien, a long, searching look. In your house, for those few days, she was happy. Truly happy. I saw a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in a very long time. Sophie, as if on cue, was brought to the door by the other woman. She saw Damien, and, to Clara's astonishment and Damien's profound relief, a slow, shy smile spread across her face. She toddled towards him, her arms outstretched. "Me?" she said, her version of his name a balm to his wounded soul. Damien knelt, his eyes blurring, and gently scooped the small child into his arms. Sophie nestled against him, her small hand patting his cheek. In that moment, holding that trusting child, Damien felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. A fierce, protective love, a profound sense of purpose. He looked up at Clara, his eyes pleading. Clara saw the raw emotion on his face, the genuine tenderness with which he held her daughter. She saw a man broken by his own mistakes, desperate for a chance at redemption. And in his eyes she saw not the cold, calculating CEO, but a man capable of profound feeling, a man who, perhaps, was just as lost and lonely as she had been. A tentative smile touched her lips. "All right, Damien," she said softly. "We'll come back." She held up a hand, but on two conditions. "Anything, Clara, anything. First, we build this on honesty, absolute honesty. No more unspoken doubts, no more hidden agendas. If something is wrong, we talk about it." "Agreed," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion. "And second," Clara continued, a new strength in her voice, "this isn't about charity. I will contribute, I will find work, I will rebuild my life, and I will do it on my own terms, with my own strength. Your support, your friendship, that is what I will accept, but not pity, and not control." Damien nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Understood, Clara, completely. Your strength, your independence, it's what I admire most about you." He rose, Sophie still secure in his arms. He extended his free hand to Clara. "Shall we go home?" Clara looked at his outstretched hand, then at her daughter, beaming in his arms. She took a deep breath, a silent prayer of hope in her heart. Then she placed her hand in his. "Yes, Damien," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's go home." Their return to the house on Beacon Hill was not a return to the past, but the beginning of a new future. The opulence remained, but it was slowly, surely transformed by the warmth of their presence, by Sophie's infectious laughter, by the quiet burgeoning affection between Damien and Clara. True to his word, Damien supported Clara as she re-enrolled in nursing school, his respect for her determination growing with each passing day. He discovered a surprising joy in the simple routines of family life, reading bedtime stories to Sophie, building fantastical Lego castles, sharing quiet dinners with Clara, their conversations filled with laughter, shared dreams, and a slowly deepening intimacy. He was no longer just Dami to Sophie. He became her Daddy Damien, a role he cherished, a responsibility he embraced with a fierce, protective love that healed parts of himself he hadn't even known were broken. Clara, in turn, blossomed, freed from the constant struggle for survival. Her natural warmth, her intelligence, her compassionate spirit shone through. She found in Damien not a rescuer, but a partner, a confidant, a man who saw her, truly saw her, and valued her for who she was. Their relationship, forged in the crucible of an improbable encounter, tested by doubt, and rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, deepened into a love that was both profound and enduring. The fortress Damien Ashworth had built around his heart had been irrevocably breached, not by a hostile takeover, but by the gentle siege of a mother's resilience and a child's innocent trust. And in its place, they built something far stronger, far more precious, a family, a home, a sanctuary, not just from the storms of the world, but for the heart. And it was, in every sense of the word, beautiful. Damien's journey back from suspicion and Clara's strength are powerful. What moment do you think truly changed Damien's mind about Clara? Could you have forgiven as Clara did, especially for Sophie's sake? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of redemption and human connection resonate with you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next one. Your like and shares also help us reach more viewers. Thanks for watching.